Good morning and welcome to the new edition of Dr. Lamba's Awakening Call. They say laws are meant to preserve a structure, a social order. But then the tragedy of the human beings is that the laws which are no longer valid are still holding sway, and they are causing heartburn and feelings of antipathy, of enmity, of frustration and disappointment. Laws are made for purposes not only for maintaining law and order, not only for maintaining social structure, but also for oppression. And it was especially so during the colonial era. All the colonial powers made laws to essentially enslave the ruled and to ensure that there was no voice of dissidence. And that is what the sedition laws in most of the countries are. This is especially the case in those countries which were former colonies, like India, Pakistan, most of the African and the Asian countries. But many countries have woken up to the reality, and those sedition laws which were applicable over there have been thrown out. Canada is one, where those outdated, outmoded laws are no longer valid. But India, despite being so enlightened and progressive, has still not got over the legacy of colonialism. Imagine, this January, an 80-year-old writer who won the highest government honor for being a great writer, creative writer, Akhil Gogoi, and a journalist, Manjit Mahata, were arrested for sedition. It was actually perceived an attempt by the government to suppress opposition to their new laws of citizenship. 3 days back, 3 former students of JNU were arrested for the same crime, sedition. And the crime, according to the police report, is they committed 3 years back. Now, what worries me is that an 80-year-old writer who is given all the honors at one time suddenly becomes a traitor to the country. And these 3 students, 3 years back, they did something. Whatever it was, whether it was good or bad, is something different. But is the government so inefficient that it has to recognize treachery, deceit, betrayal of the company after 3 years? It doesn't happen like that. And it's not a reality of the life. Now, all these people have been arrested under Section 124A of the Indian Penal Code. And as a matter of fact, when India adopted the new constitution in January 1950, these laws should have been automatically repealed. They are an expression of criminalization of dissent. And these laws were passed way back in 1870. In 1857, the first war of India's freedom was fought, which the Britishers called mutiny. It was suppressed. The then king, though nominal, was exiled to Rangoon in Burma, Myanmar. His sons, grandsons were hanged by neck. And it was all a gory scene. But to ensure that there was no dissent, the Britishers passed a law, with Indian Penal Code Section 124A, which said that anybody thinking of even having an honest dissent would be punished. And the words are very clear. They sought to punish whosoever by word, spoken or written, or even by sign, excites, attempts to excite dissatisfaction towards the government. So, what happened? People like Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, a British liberal leader, Annie Besant, they were all booked under these sedition laws. And unfortunately, this trend of 1870 continued in 2018, 2019, this year. These laws, as I said earlier, need to be scrapped. And as a matter of fact, it has become a weapon in the hands of the government to suppress dissent. And the base of democracy is dissent. I fully agree that nobody has a right to criticize the government with a view to overthrow it. Betrayal of the country is one of the highest crimes that must be punished. But if somebody says and shouts a slogan against the country, how does it matter? The frustration behind that slogan has to be seen. Of course, the moment there is any effort at violence, at force, at an act which can cause rioting or bloodshed, must be crushed, must be punished easily. But dubbing sloganeering at a university campus is certainly not only questionable, it's reprehensible. I remember I was a student of a college in 1959. Just after the school we entered the college, we used to call it intermediate class at that time. And we had a strike. Naturally, all of us was booked under sedition law. Luckily for us, the Allahabad High Court at that time said that this law was unconstitutional and was suppressing the free speech. So the cases of sedition were withdrawn, but the government of India didn't accept it. And they fought this ruling till 1962. And the Supreme Court said ultimately that the protest against government was no crime. And attempt to India, to break up India, by violence should be considered sedition, not by speeches. And I personally feel that independent India, by now, it has been free for 70 odd years. It should have sufficient capacity to tolerate all dissent, verbal, and let the free speech flourish. As a matter of fact, free speech is important. It's like a safety valve in a pressure cooker. If the pressure cooker vent is clogged and you don't allow the steam to escape, the result would be an explosion. When the people speak out, they are giving vent to their expression of disappointment, of frustration, of anger. And suppressing that would only mean the pent-up emotions would one day take up the shape of violence. In 1962, the Supreme Court, in a Kedarnath Singh judgment, very clearly said that unless and until there is violence or explicit incitement to violence, it should not be considered as sedition. And this was reiterated by Supreme Court in 2016 when it directed all authorities to follow the 1962 judgment. So when the charge sheet is filed against some students at that time, and I fully agree that the slogans they shouted at that time, saying that they'll break up India into pieces, might have been reprehensible, but they were not criminal. Now, we have got to differentiate between objectionable and criminal, between just mongering and incitement to violence. There was no incitement to violence. Now imagine similarly in UP what has happened is 3 Muslims were arrested under co-slaughter prohibition law. But first they were booked under this co-slaughter prohibition law, and then they were booked under sedition, that by killing cause they are disturbing the harmony of the country, and that's an act of sedition, a betrayal of the country. Now, I fail to imagine how and by what stretch of imagination can anybody feel that advocating, not even doing it, advocating a cow, the slaughter of a cow, can harm the interest of India. How would it break up India? One's imagination shudders at this inane, stupid, ridiculous and ludicrous claims of the government. And then, nobody has seen that the killing of the police inspector in Bulandshahr was as an act of sedition. When you kill an officer, that is in fact striking at the roots of the nation. An officer represents the might, a police officer, a uniformed officer, an army officer. They represent the might of the country, and killing them can be considered to be harmful to the country. A, it's a murder. C, it is striking at the root of your nationhood. But authorities didn't use that. Good, they didn't use it. But using the act, labeling opponents as enemies of the nation, enemies, is not something acceptable. In that age of enlightenment, when we say we have got to agree to disagree, the concept of agreeing to disagree is at the base of a democratic liberal order. Until and unless this disagreement becomes abusive, it is not a crime. And abusive does not mean a crime against the state. It can be a crime against the individuals, and the law courts are open. The man can be punished. But to say that a man just shouts down with the country, or says that this new law being passed is injurious to the country, as this 80-year-old Mohanta did. He was the winner of, as I said, Sahitya Academy Award, the highest literary award that the government gives. So he didn't go sin when he did it. And he's 80-year-old. He simply said that the laws being passed are not in the interest of the country, and they can lead to dissatisfaction, which can culminate later on in encouraging fissiparous tendencies. Now, this is a very sane statement that I don't disagree with this law. This can have a dangerous implication. But to arrest that 80-year-old man for this, who is in fact one of the well-known protagonists of the Indian unity, is, what would you call it? Madness? Lunacy? Or just sheer expression of despotic totalitarian tendencies. So if India has to survive as a democratic country, and what I'm saying about India is applicable to all those former colonies, then they have got to take a leaf out of the book of the countries like Canada, USA, where sedition is really sedition, but an expression of difference of opinion until and unless it violates and encourages violence, is to be accepted. I remember when the Khalistanis were protesting, the government of India had asked Prime Minister Harper to put it down, and he said, look here, as long as they're non-violent, as long as their expression of anger is only for stamping on the national flag of India, it might be hurting the sentiments of India, but it is not a crime. As long as they do not encourage violence, we don't call it crime. It's an expression of their opinion. So let all these governments wake up. Let the government of India also wake up and give a lead to the other countries that we accept opposition to our views, that the laws we pass and the act we take are subject to criticism, subject to protests, but with a caveat. And the caveat is that no violence would be acceptable. That in case their statements call for a rebellion, as Jayaprakash Narayan did during 1974, he asked the army not to obey the orders of the government. That was a sedition, because that was exhorting the Indian army to rebel, to go in for mutiny. But just saying that let this country break might be in bad taste, horribly bad taste, unacceptable, but it's not sedition. So let's wipe out these laws and let the country bloom, prosper, and embrace difference in opinion, as long as it's not violence motivated. Thank you.